Explorations, probing global diversification. We travel the world so you don't have to.
Hi, I'm Nina Hilger from Explorations, and thank you for joining us. Today we'll learn about Nada Yoga with Russill Paul.
So let's get started. Tell me a bit about yourself, where you grew up, and how you started with your journey.
I grew up in Chennai, which is in southern India. At that time when I grew up, it was called Madras. And I grew up, my mother worked for the film industry, so a lot of artists coming through, and that was my exposure to music. And then at the age of 19, something changed. I decided, or I felt moved, led to become a monk. And since then, this was in 1989, my journey turned towards the spiritual. So that's it, I guess.
When you say you became a monk, are you still a monk now?
In many ways, I do live the lifestyle. I'm not celibate, which is one of the aspects of the monastic life, but many other aspects of the monastic life, meaning spiritual discipline and the dedication, you could say, to being aware, particularly of presence, meaning something more than ourselves. That certainly feeds my life very much every day over the course of the day.
Wonderful. Now, I became interested in your, is it called Nada Yoga?
That's one of the terms, yes.
Okay. Would you explain it to me?
Nada is sound, and it's sound from the perspective of pitch, and it has a rich etymology to it. It means rushing and droning and current, sound current, if you will. Even water, many rivers have their roots in that word, like the neda, the need, and so on. Now, this is a word that developed alongside yoga and became a form of yoga about 2,000 years ago. And so since that time, it has developed over a couple of thousand years into the 21st century. And quite simply, Nada Yoga, or sound yoga, is a type of yoga in which sound is the medium through which the goals of yoga are realized.
Sounds interesting. I notice here you have something called the yoga of the tongue. What is is that tongue exercises or exercising the tongue while doing sounds?
Well, in the Indian spiritual tradition, mantra is based on Sanskrit, and the word Sanskrit means perfected. And this perfection is really phonetic perfection. And so the tongue is placed on a whole bunch of spots, starting with the palate, different spots on the palate to the back of the throat. And that's why it's like a yoga of the tongue. The tongue placements trigger a lot of energy. And in recent times, there's been evidence to show that, even regular speech triggers a lot of energy in the body. The palate seems to function like a soundboard, much like even the ear functions in that way, where, the things we hear can trigger energy in us, charge us, or discharge energy.
That's interesting. Is there something in our everyday life that you can give us an example of? Maybe a scream or a...
Yeah, good
hiccup
example.
Have that thing?
No, it would take a journalist to say that word, hiccup, to provide that contrast. No, really, it's a powerful thing to say. But you're right. I mean, every sound we hear, many of them at least, are having an effect. But it's also the meaning we ascribe to them, the associations we have. Some people, it's a terrible connection, but people who commit evil acts, a scream may not have the same effect on them. It's probably pleasurable for them to hear somebody scream. As for us, we hear somebody scream and it affects us differently. So meaning is also very important, obviously.
Interesting. My goodness.
So what is the meaning to a hiccup?
In your album, you explain how the music may awaken undiscovered movements of prayer and healing from within you. Would you describe that a little bit? Would you expand on that thought a little bit?
Sure. Music, as you know, has always been very integral to spiritual experience, even if we would say religious experience. You know, most spiritual traditions would use music in one form or the other. And when we go back, you know, before the great world religions, we have shamanic traditions. And so the beating of a drum or a rattle, very primitive sounds like that, have had this capacity to effect changes in consciousness. And that is really what it's about. And so today we are exposed to such a wide range of music. And of course, again, it comes down to what these things mean to us and how they affect us. But they do affect us, from elevator music to church music to very powerful forms of pop music on stage with loudspeakers and so on, to the very gentle and mantra chanting music, which has, you know, found big inroads into the music genres of today. It seems to have gained quite a status. And so music, one of the definitions of it is a carrier wave of consciousness. And so in a way, when we listen to music, what we're really tapping into is the consciousness of the person who composed it and, of course, the people who play it. And so that's how, you know, music is so powerful, because it tends to affect consciousness. And when you look down, really, life is about experiences, and experiences are related to consciousness, you know, how we experience them and process them, and whether or not we enjoy them, and whether we expand because of them, or whether we contract because of them.
Mm-hmm. And I understand there is an appropriate time of day for each song. There's one I really like, the Twilight Magic with the Crickets. I love that one. I love it. I just heard it the other day. Wow, I love that.
Okay. It's based on what we call raga, and that's a scale, a musical, a set of intervals really governed by specific ascending and descending rules. A little technical there, but that's really what a raga is. It's like a musical scale, but a little bit more involved than that. And they are set for different times of the day and night. And so on the album Nada Yoga, I took these types of ragas from twilight through midnight, and I actually played them from twilight through midnight in the studio, in this beautiful studio in Sebastopol. And we captured, you know, the best moments, and we put it on a CD to exemplify what this experience of nada could be. And so I'm so glad you feel connected to it like that.
Would you recommend a yogic pose during this time, or just maybe a series of poses, or just maybe just lying down and relaxing?
Well, the music itself is designed to be very expansive, and so lying down really is about the best way to experience it, or in any choice of meditation pose such as Padmasana or Ardha Padmasana or Siddhasana or Vajrasana. These are some of the poses that it works well with. And of course, you can do regular asana practice too. Many people do that, especially in the evening, and have, you know, the full, over the course of an hour, use the first piece for the yoga practice, the asana practice, the next 20 minutes, because they're 20 minutes long each, for pranayama, and then the last 20 minutes for meditation and shavasana.
Okay, now here's a question. You don't have to answer it. If
Okay.
I'm driving in traffic to Toronto, it's an hour drive from me. Is it safe to listen to your music during this time? Or will...
The thing is that it's a liability to answer that question if I say it's safe and then somebody has an accident. But the thing is, music, if we listen to it, two things, you know, Nina, when we listen to music, of course, you know, there is how our brain cells function and the kinds of synapses that happen as a result to particular kinds of music. And this type of music does tend to put us in a different space. It's an otherworldly space. And so normally when we move into these spaces, the tendency, because we live in a very practical world, we feel kind of relieved from it, and we feel drawn into this deeper space, and then we tend to sort of want to let go of the pragmatic, or you can say the demands of the practical world. So that's a danger when driving. We don't want to listen to music that pulls us too much out of it, because it's just a natural tendency. I feel that pull all the time when I drive. I want to kind of be in a different space, but then I know the danger of being in that space completely and, losing the sense of, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I was curious about that when I listened to your the Nada Yoga, the ancient sound of the ancient science of sound.
Yeah.
Wow, very powerful. It just wow. I went through a series of yoga poses, and it was just phenomenal. And I can't imagine listening to this while driving in the car. I mean, if I feel some road rage, maybe I could use it for a bit, but I don't know.
Good idea. I think those are good moments, when we're very upset, or either because of the driving experience or because of something that comes up in our mind, maybe a call, an email that triggers a strong emotion. Those are really good moments to use the support of a type of music that helps us find release of that particular emotion, the strength of that emotion that can be very consuming. And some emotions can be very consuming and detrimental to our well-being.
Well, that being said, do you have specific music for specific emotions and dealing with perhaps grief or sadness?
Yes, the raga system is really designed on what are called rasa or rasa, which is sentiment or feeling, which is what most composers utilize, for instance, in creating a movie soundtrack, using musical intervals to create that sense of sadness or joy, in addition to how the music is structured, very upbeat or very mellow. Now, with my music, what I've done, the body of my work goes back 10, 12 years ago, and I haven't really made much music since that time because I moved into writing and teaching. And the early music was very much limited in that sense into the wide scope of emotion that's possible. But I am writing new music since, I took a sabbatical last year, 2 years ago precisely, to do that. And I'm coming out with a whole bunch of new albums starting this year. So these emotions, especially focusing on joy, focusing on, and grief is another very important word, because at some point I do want to make an album about death and dying and the types of chants that can be used for, people who are passing, but also for people who want to feel that connection to people who have passed in their life. And one of the reasons is I've lost many people very close to me. And so it's also a healing album for myself. So thank you for that reminder. A grief raga album at some point.
Oh, I'll be all over that one. My goodness. Okay. Well, I have some loved ones who it's actually around this time of year too, and it would be great to have music where I can feel connected with them. And wow. And what would you recommend while they're listening to something like this for grief?
I think, generally speaking, the music of either the harp or classical guitar is a very soothing form of vibration that helps with grief and also mediates very well at the moment of death. And I'm looking forward to a conference I'm doing later this year with the Music Therapy Institute of America, and their whole process is about this type of music. And so the harp and classical guitar, if you find music written for harp or classical guitar, just those instruments by themselves are very, very good, especially the softer kinds of music, not the up-tempo kind.
Will you be traveling around America or North America for performances?
Yes. Starting this in the next few days, I'll be in the Bahamas, and then in Chicago, and then in Tennessee, and then in various parts of the U.S. and parts of Europe, Costa Rica, Spain, also over the course of the year.
Oh, that sounds great. What sort of an audience do you expect?
It's a mixture. I tend to get the kind of people who are from the mantra and chanting tradition and also very much into yoga. But then I get the general type of spiritual seeker and the type of person who's interested in healing, and for some reason, a lot of psychotherapists gravitate towards my work, and also healers, meaning people who do massage and faith-type healing. Not faith-type healing, sorry, but I meant hands, light healing, various type of transformational healing modalities that are in vogue today.
My goodness. Sounds like you'll be very busy this year.
It's a busy year, yes, and I'm looking forward to it, especially after, taking some time off. It's good to be able to engage with people. Yeah.
And I understand that you have some pilgrimages.
Yes, we just got back from this annual pilgrimage we do each year in January, and this is very steeped in this tradition of sound and mantra, and we make it an experience where we study it, we go deep into it by being in India, which is very unique. The vibrations there are such, it's permeated with these particular sounds and their powerful vibrations. But then we experience them in these ancient rituals, which is so powerful. So we come back very renewed. We take about 30 people with us each year. And for my wife and I who lead it, it's a very deep experience. We come back very charged as well. And these folks who travel with us, their lives are so changed by this experience. Many come back year after year with us to just do the same experience, but they go deeper as a result. So yeah, it's wonderful. We're just back from it, literally.
Oh, wow, that's great. Tell me a little bit about it. Is it over a few weeks or a month?
No, it's a month long. It's a month long, and people can choose either 18 days of it, which is more dynamic, or choose 18 days plus the rest of the rest of the month, which is about 12 days, which goes deeper into a more deep meditation experience. Yeah.
Is it, do you have more scheduled events, or do you allow a lot of free time for people to explore their, what they're learning?
It's a combination. We do two things. One is we move between, dynamic days out, excursions out, to days in, where we assimilate the experience. And that balances between also the course of the day when we have conducted sessions and then give people a significant amount of time to also integrate. So it's very well balanced. We've done it for 18 years now, so we've really learned how to take care of people.
Goodness. What would a typical day be like on one of your pilgrimages?
Well, the early morning is always, people rise up at 5 if they want to. They sleep in if they don't want to. They meditate early morning on their own if they want to, or they do other things if they want to. Then we have some communal prayer sessions that begin the morning prayer. And then later, after breakfast and 45 minutes after breakfast, we start our retreat. There's 3 hours of conducted retreat that I offer. The afternoons are free, and then 2 hours. And then another hour of free time, or an hour and a half, and then evening prayer, and then we begin to retire for the night. But this session changes. It's not always the same. Some days we go out, it's structured differently. Sometimes we go dance on the river, by the river, under the moonlight. If there's a full moon, we do dancing while chanting, movement. Some of the chants are very dynamic, so we use movement in our chanting.
What is that for? I've never heard of this.
Oh, it's actually... it's a practice, first of all, with the Vaishnava tradition in India. Movement, chanting, and moving and chanting is very popular, and that's an age-old tradition, goes back over 2,000 years. A rich tradition of mantra chanting with movement. And then there's also the Sufi tradition that originated in India. This is the mystical sect within Islam, and they studied a lot of the ancient Indian way of doing things, esoteric mantra and movements and yoga and breath. And the Sufis developed a way, particularly Rumi, whom it's attributed to, where you turn while you chant. And it's called the Remembrance of God. You really use a mantra to remember the divine. And then as you chant, you begin to have the sense of letting go. It's like a moving meditation with a single phrase that you use to open your heart.
And this phrase, and this is also a healing sound?
Of course. And a mantra of some kind, a phrase that you use that has a deep meaning. Usually these mantras, they have a quality where the vibration itself is very healing, and then the meaning has its healing. So the two together. And then you bring a melody, a beautiful melody together with that. And then it's evocative, and you want to say it. That's the thing. You just want to say it, and then you say it, and when you say it, you feel something. And the more you do it, the more you feel transformed by the experience.
And this is all in Sanskrit?
Yes, my work is entirely based on Sanskrit, yes.
Please explain why.
Well, it was something I studied in school, and then, of course, it became very much a part of my spiritual life. And in India, like Latin, for the Roman Catholic, Sanskrit is the language of spirituality, and it's literally the language of yoga as well. And once I became a monk, it was something that I took to as a very integral part of my life, my spiritual life. And so it's the medium for me.
Is it true that Sanskrit has much more meaning? It's more advanced than English, the English language?
In some ways, yes. I mean, when it comes to being able to express yourself very cogently, but in a linear way, English is beautiful in so many ways because it's got great syntax. You can capture a feeling, a mood, and so on in a descriptive way. Sanskrit, on the other hand, has this quality of capturing an experience along with an idea vibrationally. And that's the crucial difference. And in some ways, English is sourced in Sanskrit because of its Germanic and Latin roots. So Sanskrit is the oldest, you could say, mother language for all European languages. It's closest to what linguists call Proto-Indo-European. And so when we use Sanskrit in that way, we discover what you can call the original mantric language. And that's the capacity to feel, to experience, to see, to think, all of this at the same time. The danger we have with English is that we tend to isolate thinking from experience, right? Mm-hmm. That's the difference between Sanskrit usage as mantra and English usage in its traditional or utilitarian way. What we can do, though, is bring the two together where we can, and that's part of my work, helping people rediscover how to use language in a way that doesn't separate them from experience. We've got to recover the capacity for the fullness of experience. And that eludes us when language becomes very abstract in its usage, not in itself. Language in itself is not abstract. And rap is a good example of how English can be very visceral.
Now, there was something I had learned. I learned a little bit of Sanskrit in one of my classes, and my instructor said something about it's important to know where the sound is coming from, and to exaggerate it to get the full meaning. Is now, am I getting that? This has been quite a while since I had that class. But is that true that the more you accentuate certain sounds and vibration in Sanskrit, it can bring out even more energy, or not?
Very true, because in Sanskrit we have such a variety of possibilities, literally. I mean, you start, as I said, consonants begin at the back of the throat and move to the lips. You've got 5 groups of them. And then within each group, you move between a soft and an aspirated form of the consonant. You've got 5 letters in each group. So you've got 25 distinct consonants, and then they are combined, the consonants combine to form complex consonants. And that's really what gives mantras their power. And so your instructor probably meant to say that in paying attention to the pronunciation, the meaning of the sound is better felt and expressed. And he or she was right, because Sanskrit is, like English, onomatopoeic. It sounds like what it means. And so sounds were used to capture experiences. And English is like that too. And you take a look at it, like the word buzz, it sounds like what it means. And Sanskrit is very much like that. But as English progresses, it's not so much that English is not mantric. It's how we use English that tends to move away from that capacity to connect meaning to experience. Because here's an example. It's a very profound example. We can talk of peace and not necessarily feel peace, and yet seemingly understand each other.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about it on a world stage, for instance. People or countries can speak about peace, but not necessarily feel it in that moment. Maybe even not want it necessarily, or live it. And so that's the danger with language that is abstracted from experience. Not that it is in itself, it's how we use it. In the same way, to use mantras is to recover that capacity to feel more strongly and capture the fullness of experience, like a gestalt. Unlike this abstraction, we tend to function in this abstraction in how we use language. That's the value of mantras. They recover this capacity for really being more fully human, I'd say, because it gives us the full scope of consciousness, if you will. The spectrum of consciousness is awakened by the language. Whereas in our usage of English, and I keep saying that because English is not a bad language or a less mantric language, but it's how we use it.
Now I have a question about your performances, about your instruments, actually.
Okay.
How many instruments do you play?
Keyboards, and of course, stringed instruments are my main instruments. I play guitars, various kinds of them, classical, nylon string, and steel-stringed guitars. Then I have this custom-made sitar type instrument. It sounds like a sitar, but it's built like a different instrument and played much like a guitar or a banjo. And so that's one line of instruments, and I have several of those. Then I play harmonica. I haven't used it as much. I've snuck it into a few recordings, but I'm starting to create albums now with harmonica and guitar, and I do play many instruments. Yeah,
that's wonderful. What do you usually prefer for your albums and for performances?
Well, as I was saying, my new albums, I've just started to take up the guitar again actively after about 25 years, and that sounds really crazy, but it's true. I used my Indian instruments more, but then since the last few years, I've reconnected to the guitar, which was a very important instrument for me. I learned my music theory on guitar, actually, and so I love the instrument. And my latest album, that's actually ready for, very soon it will be released, is an electric guitar album with mantras on them, very much influenced by by 70s music. I was a big fan of 70s music, people like Mark Knopfler from the Dire Straits and Carlos Santana and Eric Clapton, people like that. And so this album is my inspiration of their type of guitar playing, but fused with my deep, deep knowledge of mantras and Indian music. And so it's ready to go. It would be very soon.
I can't wait to hear it. My goodness.
Yes. Or you'll be one of the first people I will send it to.
Thank you so much, Russill Paul. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you too, Nina. Been a pleasure likewise.
Thank you, Russell. For more information about Russill Paul and his music, check out our website at zintarsirs.com. You'll find everything you need to know. I'm Nina Hilger for Explorations. I look forward to seeing you again.